from, oops, there we are, Module 7, Risk and Return. I sort of did this lecture across 2 days, so I'm going to talk about it. Oh, I realize that's out of your screen view. I'll talk about it here and go over some of the main concepts, and we'll do this in a couple different presentation files so that A, YouTube can upload it, and B, I can take a break. So Module 7, Risk and Return, and there's some general ideas that are associated with this. So the first thing is you're just going to have to get comfortable with calculating return. There's a lot of different ways that people calculate return. One of those that we talked about in class in the first part of the semester was like an IRR, but there's going to be a bunch of different ways to think about what a return is. We're going to add some vocabulary about potential different outcomes, variance, standard deviation, things like that. Those are ways of describing events that are disparate in a sort of holistic manner. We're also going to think bigger than one investment. We're going to think about what happens when we have a portfolio of investments. So before, we looked at an NPV of a project and we said, oh, well, this project has a negative or a positive NPV. Now we're going to think about whether or not two different projects can help us get a better return for lower risk. And lastly, we're going to think about how to standardize discussions of returns and risk. There's lots of different things to think about in that regard, but basically it goes back to the same thing. We want to use some standard words to describe returns and projects and the risk that they give us, and that will help us discuss those things easier in social situations, and also mathematically describe the returns and the risk that we took. Okay, so this is a one-period return, and usually this is always the same assumption. Like, people assume that you buy it at some price at time t, and so you'll have some subscript price underscore t, and at t+1 you get a dividend and you get some price. And so these subscripts tell you when those happen. You can think of the price at time t as sort of like time 0. Assume that you're standing in time 0 and you buy this thing for that price. You sell it at time t+1, which would be 1 if t is 0, and you get the dividend and you get the price. It's just like the stuff that we talked about in the first part of the semester, and you'll find that if you rearrange these, that you get the NPV formula. So the return at time, and let me just point out, the return at between t and t+1 is the interest rate that we would get on that investment. And the way to think about this when you look at the subscript is the t is the first period, the comma means like from this time to that time, and t+1 means the next time. So if you saw t+2 here, you would know that this was for 2 time periods, but we're mainly going to focus on t+1. And we have the dividend, we have the price, and then we have the change in price. These are, again, all different ways that we can think about writing the same thing, where we buy something in time 0, we sell it in time 1, and we get a dividend and the price that we sell it for. The holding period return, let me just zoom out a little bit. The holding period return says, what is my return for the entire time period? So a lot of times what they'll do is they'll tell you what the return was for, say, the S&P 500 every year for the last 6 years. So we might have gotten 5%, 2%, 3%, etc. And we want to get the total holding period return. So let me just open a file. And I'm going to just show you what that looks like. 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. All right. So let's say that we have a return of 5%, 2%, 3%, 1%, and 10%. You can do a negative, but we're just going to not think about that right now. And I start out with $1. Okay, so if I grow at 5% here, what do I have at the end of year 1? So this is going to be $1.05. Notice that on each time period, we have what we started with times 1.02, or well, times the interest rate for that year. So the interest rate between year 0 and year 1 was 5%. The interest rate between year 1 and year 2 was 2%, etc. The holding period return notice that the holding period return is exactly the same. I'm going to highlight this, is 22.56%. It's exactly the same as that. That's because we started with the dollar. It's easy to see. So this would be the holding period return. And if we wanted to, we could get the periodic return, which is right here. It's 1 plus the total holding period return to the power of 1 over t minus 1. So let's go back to Excel and do that. We have 5 time periods, so I'm going to do 1 over 5, and we will get some percent. Let me add a couple decimal places. Let's highlight that in a different color just to have fun. Ooh, that's a bad color. This is going to be the periodic return. And what's neat about this periodic return is that we can see if we have a dollar and we do, let's see how to do this. Oops. Notice that, oops, let's make this red. Notice that these two are exactly the same. So what does the total holding period return tell us? Well, it says that if we put a dollar in at year 0, at year 5 we got out $1.23 or $1.22 and change. And the periodic return tells us what the expected return would be every year. So if we put a dollar in year 0 and we got the same exact return every year, that we would end up with $1.22.56. So that is the holding period return and the periodic return.